ever imagined what you would like to change and then unpacked what needs to happen to create that change, including your own causal assumptions? A theory of change is a story of how you think positive change can happen. This is the theory of change for the UK CCU-funded Forest Land and Governance Program, better known as FLAG in Indonesia. Currently, Indonesia has the highest rate of deforestation in the world and is the fifth largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Indonesia has more than two-thirds of the world's known tropical peatland, covering between 15 and 20 million hectares, equivalent to about 10% of the country's total land area. Frequent fires, clearance, and drainage of these areas for oil palm, commercial forestry, and other business activities are resulting in massive emissions of carbon dioxide. These emissions are responsible for contributing to global warming and are now a global concern. In September and October 2015 alone, these emissions totaled more than the UK's annual CO2 emissions and led to an estimated economic loss of $16.1 billion for Indonesia. The FLAG theory of change addresses this problem in 5 different ways. These are called pathways of change and explain how we think positive change is expected to occur, leading to the eventual reduction of land-based emissions, which is the overall goal of the program. The first pathway of change starts with increasing the number of qualified independent conflict mediators. Indonesia's internal boundaries are a constant source of conflict, especially between communities and private sector. Local community and indigenous rights have not been recognized, and this combined with weak rule of law in allocating business concessions has led to overlapping claims over land. If there are more mediators, conflicts can be addressed equitably, and those managing land will feel more secure in making long-term investments and managing land responsibly. It will also reduce the cost the company has to pay in a day-to-day management of the conflict, so they can invest this money in building solid relationships with local communities or back into their business. This pathway assumes that sufficient disputes can be resolved through independent mediation, not government measures, and the settled disputes continue to result in enhanced land use management, not further destruction. The second pathway of change focuses on activities that will increase the number of good quality spatial plans at the district and province level in a transparent way with all the stakeholders involved. This means openly sharing data, maps, and aligning with development priorities in environmental protection, particularly responsible management of forest and peatland. Civil society plays an important role in holding government and companies to account in ensuring plans that have been agreed are implemented and raising the red flag when plans are contravened, making sure such cases are brought to court and punitive action taken. This pathway assumes that the spatial plans developed do mandate the protection of forest and allocate degraded land for commercial activities, as well as provide space for nearby communities to engage in sustainable forest management. It also assumes that there is frequent and systematic up-to-date information available for civil society to independently monitor implementation of the spatial plans. The third pathway of change is to support the Financial Services Authority of Indonesia, or OJK, to develop, implement, and monitor a sustainable financing regulation. This regulation will subject small and medium-scale oil palm companies in Indonesia to scrutiny on their social and environmental safeguards before receiving investment from Indonesian financing institutions. In theory, this will put pressure on companies without such safeguards to change their social and environmental practices, some of which trigger unsustainable land management and increase emissions. This assumes that a significant number of companies using sustainable financing have had prior poor land use performance and that other sources of finance are not available to those companies who would like to continue with unsustainable practices. The fourth pathway of change will act in synergy alongside the first 3 pathways by improving forest and peatland practices by the private sector. Many larger oil palm, pulp, and paper companies have now made zero deforestation commitments, but there has been limited monitoring of their supply chain, particularly with regard to deforestation and drainage of peatlands. Civil society media groups will monitor this and publish findings regarding overall levels of compliance. The assumption is that these companies will react to these public reports as they will be concerned over their reputation with markets, consumers, and potential investors, and will therefore improve their practices and hence reduce emissions. The fifth pathway focuses on the players involved in the FLAG program itself, working in different provinces in Indonesia, and their role in creating and sharing evidence and lessons from the positive changes they create along pathways 1 through 4. By sharing such lessons, it is assumed that the practices such as conflict mediation and spatial planning will be scaled up and introduced into other areas in Indonesia that will also contribute to eventually addressing the core problems and reduce emissions. This assumes that lessons generated in one geographical area will be relevant for other geographies in Indonesia, and that the FLAG projects and the UKCCU have the capacity to advocate effectively for the change and scale up to these other areas. There are currently 5 projects and UKCCU working to contribute to these pathways of change. Some projects contribute to one pathway alone, others to more than one, and they are all working in different areas of Indonesia. Each year, the FLAG program will both monitor and document the evidence that positive change is actually happening in relation to these 5 pathways and the assumption initially made hold true. Changes in emissions may not be directly seen within the 5-year time frame of the program, but by measuring and evidencing changes along the 5 pathways, we can assess the potential to reduce emissions before the end and beyond the lifetime of the program. So that's how we think positive change can happen, and how the FLAG program can make a contribution to positively changing land management practices in Indonesia, and hence reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate climate change.